Thank you all for joining. We're going to get started in just 1 minute as we let everyone log on.
Hello, everyone, and happy Wednesday. Thank you so much for joining us today for this month's webinar, Stories from the Field, Cause Chat with Black Fundraising Professionals. My name is Pearl Hoagland, and I am the Senior Program Manager for the Fundraising Academy. Before we get started, a couple notes. This webinar will be conversational with the opportunity to ask questions during the webinar, as well as a 30-minute Q&A following the presentation. Please submit any questions you have in the Q&A option within your Zoom controls. Closed captioning is available for this webinar, and to enable this setting, click the CC option in your Zoom controls. Caption size can be adjusted in the video settings under accessibility. In the days following the webinar, you will receive an email with a link to with a link to access the slide deck and recording to review again at your leisure. You've got a cause, learn how to fund it. At Fundraising Academy Cause Selling Education, we enhance fundraisers' skills so they can develop and sustain donor relationships to advance their cause in today's growing giving landscape through a proven contemporary curriculum presented by world-class nonprofit fundraising leaders. We'd like to take some time to recognize our important affiliate partners who provide training and education to fundraisers around the country. Check out the map to find an institute in your community. Now, I am very pleased to start this poll and then introduce Tamika Franklin. But before we do that, if you could please tell us about yourself and how many years of fundraising experience you have. You should see a poll on your screen. Please select the answer. We'll close it in about 10 seconds. All right, looks like we have a good mix. We've got some volunteers, board members. The majority on the call today are 0 to 3 years of fundraising experience. Next, 4 to 10 years at 26%, and then about 16%, 10 plus years. So a good mix. Thank you all so much for joining us. Now, without further ado, I would like to turn it over to Tamika Franklin, Director of Development for Price School, UC San Diego. Thank you so much to Tamika and our panelists for being here. She will introduce everyone on this call. We're so happy to have you. Over to you, Tamika.
Thank you so much, Pearl, and welcome everyone. It's great to see you today. My name is Tamika Franklin, she, her, hers. I'm the Director of Development for the Price School, UC San Diego, and I am so thrilled to be here to moderate this panel on Black fundraising, what it means to be professionals in this field, and how we navigate this space. I'm pleased to share the time with Tiffany Lamarr, Jordan Harrison, Adama Desil, and they're going to introduce themselves and their time here a little bit, and then we're going to jump into some questions. So Adama, I'm going to start with you.
Thank you, Tamika, and thank you for having me today as a panelist. So as you mentioned, my name is Adama Desil. I'm the Assistant Director of Training and Capacity Building with the Children's Services Council here on the East Coast in Broward County, Florida. I have had the pleasure of being in the fundraising space for over 15 years, kind of started incidentally in my career working at the YMCA, and then progressively it's just become a passion for me. Where I currently sit, I am not an active fundraiser, but through my position, we work very closely with a lot of nonprofits, child and family serving nonprofits with the Children's Services Council. And a part of our capacity building efforts is really rooted in the foundation of having them understand the benefits of fundraising and development. So that was one of the things that I brought over when I came to the Children's Services Council, and it is a huge part of what we try to instill with our local businesses, because we know diversity in funding is, one of the lifebloods to really being able to have strong organizations. So excited to be with you today and to talk a little bit about my experience as a Black fundraiser, and also the capacity building experiences that we've had over the past 5 years with nonprofit organizations.
Lovely, thank you so much. Definitely looking to diving into that. Jordan, maybe pivot to you.
Yes, thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're logging in from. My name is Jordan Harrison. Use the he, him, his pronouns, and glad to be with you all today. Background, I've been in the fundraising space for around 10 years in different capacities, from small community groups or different nonprofits to different larger ones as well. My current role is a vice president of community impact and partnerships at Reality Changers. We're a San Diego-based nonprofit that serves first generation college-bound students starting in the 8th grade. So I've had a lot of experience and engagement, and particularly working with donors and different community partners and how we can expand the capacity for our nonprofit and bring as many different folks to the table to sustain and build our mission in serving first generation college students. And glad to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And last but not least, Tiffany.
Hello, everyone. Tiffany Lamarr, she, her, hers. I'm currently the annual giving manager over at Promises to Kids, supporting foster youth, and our mission is to create brighter future for foster youth here in San Diego County. My career started off ground level as a fundraiser in college at a calling center, moving my way into management there. And I have my hands just involved anywhere from donor stewardship over to donor engagement. I've had my hand in corporate sponsorships, which are definitely different, all the way back home to annual giving currently. And honestly, it's just exciting just to be able to bring value in to the smaller donors. So it's a different world in many cases than corporate sponsorships, obviously. And then outside of that, a lot of the work that I do is just with community organizations from Urban League, AFP San Diego, as well as YNPN, which is just a young nonprofit network of young professionals.
Nice, wonderful. Well, welcome to all three of you. And just a reminder that we are going to be taking Q&A at the end of our session. So you can submit that in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen in the Zoom functions. All right, so let's just dive right in. We're talking about careers in philanthropy. What was the turning point when you realized a career existed within philanthropy? What did you discover, and how did you carve out a place? Tiffany, let's start with you.
Yeah. So for me, I was going to law school. That was the route that I was taking. But I definitely knew that as like a college athlete, and of course, like you're at UCLA, and it comes with its own academic pressures, but academic pressures and like athletic pressures, I knew I needed that gap year to basically rewire my brain from some of the assistance that I think I had as an athlete to really focus and reshift my life and brain and everything over to law. In that gap year, I decided to manage the calling center for fundraising over at UC San Diego. And I think just in that time, being exposed to so many different types of donors and actually grooming over 60 college students and showing them fundraising, I actually realized how challenging it was. And I also saw how transactional fundraising could be if the students weren't actually trained to have just conversations with folks. And I think as a donor myself, I saw how I would feel if it was a transactional experience versus like just a human to human experience. And I think in doing that, it was a very unique fundraising experience, teaching people who didn't necessarily care about fundraising, not only how to care about it, but its value and how to do it properly. And I think in that 2 years, I grew so much just in the fundraising field and learned how passionate I was about it, that there was no way that I wanted to continue to go on to law school. And I had actually found something that I could go to every single day. And when it got rough, which in fundraising, you do hit some roadblocks, I was still so passionate about who I was impacting that I can continue forward. And that's when I knew that I'm going to stick this out. And I really wanted to dive deep and become a student of the field as well as an expert in the field.
Love it. And yeah, we're definitely going to dive into that a little bit because I think there are going to be some similarities across the board here. Adama, your thoughts on that question? When you realize?
Yeah, the question makes me smile because I probably was one of the most disgruntled and disengaged fundraisers at the beginning. I was really thrusted into the world of fundraising, being with the Y. It just became a part of a very large part of our culture at the Family Center. And, it just wasn't a part of my space. I was a nonprofit professional. Like my world was social service. My world was helping children and families, and the money part lived somewhere else. But the passion came, really with my first annual campaign for the Family Center. Just had a regular position like all my other peers in terms of, doing my responsibility in terms of getting and giving and learning a little bit about everything. But then, quickly came to see that, I had a passion for it. That year we were able to increase our gifts by almost 10,000. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you talk about novice who know nothing at all about fundraising and just learning the principles. And I think the real turning point for me was when I realized there was a strong and solid line between what drove me to come to work every day and what made me a really good fundraiser. So the stories were exactly the same. And, getting to that place where I could tell my fundraising story connected to other people's reason for being connected to the why and why they would want to donate. So that was really the critical turning point. And honestly, the success that we had with connecting with our volunteers and our parents, because our campaign and our style, our model, definitely community and end user youth driven. And that just became something that I was really, really passionate about, showing the parents how they could help to contribute to make their center stronger and their community stronger by just telling their story. So that was the turning point for me.
Love it. Jordan, thoughts?
Yeah, I think for me, there was an exposure point and a turning point. I think when I was later in my teens, my father started a nonprofit. So I got to see him writing grants and trying to talk to people. I was like, what are you doing? But I was fascinated by it. And then when I started in the nonprofit, my undergraduate degree was actually in business marketing and I loved sales. So I actually started in sales and I was selling tape for a company on the East Coast. And I remember waking up one day and being like, I'm just tired of selling tape. I think I can do something different. And I remember when I started working at Reality Changers, having the skill set of being able to work with youth, but also seeing how sales and some of the skills that I learned in professional selling was important in some of the fundraising aspects and the relationship building and things like that. So I saw it as like a great place that would also drive me, I think, as Adama said, to have like that purpose-driven selling where it's like, no, this is something that I'm passionate about, that I care about. And I care about this a lot more than tape. So I was really excited. And I saw this as a great place to take the skills, to build the relationships with some of the experience I had in sales before.
Wow. Yeah. So I'm hearing some similarities here and I'm hearing some specifics that I'd love to dive into a little bit more. But I love the idea, Jordan, for you, where, your background is very different, but you figured out a way to kind of push it into this space. And, as we look at ways to expand the industry, thinking about what are related skill sets and how they work really well and complement the work that we do, I think will be really key. So we know that we're working on, a lot of teams that are, let's be honest, not diverse. The last stat I remember seeing was, 12% of any of the industry could be considered, falling into a diverse category, and that's all of them that we can consider and all of them we don't know yet. So, what does your team look like right now? If you could share. Anybody want to jump in with that?
Well, where I am, again, our focus is not specifically the fundraising and development for the organization, but we do connect with a lot of very niche and emerging nonprofits that, that's really the heart blood. So my team right now is pretty diverse, in terms of the background of the folks that I work with directly. When we look at the landscape of the organizations, they look pretty much, like a lot of standard nonprofits. The fact that we do serve a lot of minority-led organizations, when you're looking at some of the smaller ones, we find that we can connect with them and help them find their nonprofit story. But when, as you did mention, when you get up to some of the larger nonprofits, you do see some of the disparities there in having some of the leadership, be as diverse as the communities that they're representing. So.
I saw you reaching.
I can go. For us, I think that, and I'll speak for now, and I'll speak just historically at the different teams that I've been on. I think there's usually a difference between what our programs team looks like and our development team. And I'll start by just saying that. And I think that Promises to Kids has actually done a really good job of recognizing that and actually intentionally making changes to address that. And I think we started from the ground up, and we started by actually just reaching out to our client base or those who were actually supporting and hearing from them personally that they wanted to see other faces that looked like them, especially seeing that we have a lot of programs with mentorship, and hearing that that was important to them. I think that our team has done a good job to diversify all areas and aspects of our organization. And that includes anywhere from our staff to our development staff specifically, and just different initiatives to diversify, again, our donor base.
I think for us at Reality Changers, almost the exact same thing as Tiffany said. We have a new CEO, who is an incredible Black woman, Tamara Craver, who has really had us think critically around what does our development team look like, what does fundraising look like, and how can we make sure that we're mindful and conscious of who's part of the team, who's marketing, who's sharing, and how can we make sure the stories that we're sharing of our students and their experiences are led from strength and from just integrity with what we look like and how we serve the community as well.
Absolutely. And I think there's an importance that, we have, or a commitment we should have to the communities we serve and the organizations that we want to, protect, in that who gets to sit at the table and make those decisions versus who is actually enacting those decisions and reaching out and getting that feedback. And is that communication open? It doesn't always look that way. And so it's nice to hear that that's kind of how people are thinking about it. At the Price School, very similar. We've gone through a leadership change. Our board is actively looking at itself and really having those tough questions of, what we need to make sure that we're reflecting who's on the ground. So I'm excited to see where all of that transition goes, and I'm really proud of them for having those conversations, but they are difficult. And you find yourself having to, check a little bit of yourself at the door, but bringing pieces of that so they can get the context. And I'm wondering if any of you want to talk about how you negotiate that space where you can be educational at some points and then you have to step away from that.
One, I have learned in this past year just to invite people into these varying spaces. I think it's been challenging over the last few years just to find a space that you felt welcomed in as a Black fundraiser, just in general. So once you find this space, you almost want to be like, this is my space. No, you don't get to come to space. But my goal is actually to educate people. So that's just not an approach that I can take. So things that I've done is when we've had these types of conversations with my supervisor being a Latina woman who is doing the same work from a different lens, I invite her into these spaces and we are all getting an ideas as to what our organization is doing and how we can actually impact that, so that we can continue to impact our foster youth at the end of the day. And so again, one of the things like actionable that we can do is I have a standing line, or we both have a standing line called New Ideas. So this past Tuesday under New Ideas, if I'm doing community presentations and I'm usually stuck in the Rotary and Chamber space, where I'm usually the only Black face in the room there, I actually switched it on up and looked at so many other community organizations that have a very diverse and many Black faces of folks who want to impact, but don't even know that this opportunity exists just because we haven't tapped into that arena. And those are different associations, whether they're engineering, doctors, dentists, there's all types of associations and circles of folks who could positively influence this space. And I think that it's having that New Ideas line item in our weekly agendas, we're able to bridge gaps between other smaller organizations like the Black Tech Link Group, who are also trying their best to integrate into the philanthropic space. And again, untapped potential.
I think for me, it was a lot of learning at first when I first started in fundraising and operating in the spaces. I think as a younger Black man in the spaces, I would go into different fundraising events and folks would sometimes mistake me as the service staff or the help staff, and dealing with those type of experiences and then being expected to keep my composure and dealing with like, okay, I have some colleagues that reflect most of the folks in this room. How can we enter this space together? What are the things that you're conscious of and mindful of? And what are some of the emotional capacities that you might have to deal with some certain situations? Because there have been a lot of events where unnecessary microaggressions, these things have been just blatantly said. And I think as a Black fundraiser, finding that balance between, do I have the capacity or the space to educate this person? Is that my role in this space? Is that someone else's? And then how do you navigate that? So that has been something that I have personally been exploring and sitting with And it's something that we've even taken to our own board members of thinking, as we're saying, we are critically supporting first generation students of color and knowing some of the challenges that these students are facing. We are not silent about saying that we support and stand with the students and some of the social justice issues that might come along with. And that means if you want to come and support us, then we are going to be unwavering in what we're saying that we're aligning with. And I've seen a huge shift, and I've had an interesting experience where my first supervisor was a white male, and seeing how he was able to operate in spaces, and now working under a Black woman and seeing how she operates and how folks gravitate or don't gravitate for. It's been a very interesting just sight to see. The ease for one, some of the nuances and ways that I've seen my boss have to navigate or coach with the different ways. And so I think for me, that's just been a lot of the learning and noticings in the journey so far that I've been reflecting on and questioning and sitting with, even with some of my colleagues in the development team as well.
Great answer. I think for me, I've just added on to my personal and professional job description, the role of being that individual that's always going to present the case for diversity wherever I sit. I'm blessed to be in spaces that not a lot of, folks get to be, and that's of all colors, shapes, genders. So I do look at what perspective I'm there to bring. I don't think it's ever incidental that I'm invited to a space, be that work, professional, or otherwise. So it's really critical for me to see and to be the voice of what is missing and to bring a new and a different perspective to that space. So I'm always thinking from that vantage point. I love that one of the foundations of the WISE fundraising principle is keenly driven by centering the experience of the youth and centering the experience of the family. So I'm always grounded, from that work experience to understand who I'm there to serve. So yes, I'm sitting here as a professional, but bottom line, I'm representing these children and families that, at the end of the day, I come to work to serve. So I don't represent them in terms of their experience, but I do represent them as a placeholder to say, when we're considering how we're going to fund something, when we're considering how we're going to build a program, when we're going to consider who should be at the table, their voice, I can try to be an advocate and a champion for their voice. So that really is what the turning point is for me.
There are two things I want to kind of follow up on with all of you here. I think there's a managing up piece, and then we can dive a little bit more into the microaggressions part. I think those two can complement each other, but they're very, there's an internal piece and an external piece. And so it brought up for me managing up for folks who mean well, maybe even kind of in theory understand this, but they're not paying attention enough, or they're not finely tuned into what these things look like for us as we're walking into the room and being part of that team. Where's your comfort level in having those conversations and say bringing them up to leadership? I'm talking internally, not necessarily with an external board of volunteers. But when we say as a team, we're going to go in, we're doing this event, these are the roles that you're going to play, but donor so-and-so may need the glass of wine, and you're going to be the person who gets selected out for that. I don't know why, I just happen to be the person who's selected out for that. Are there, there are moments in my career I've had to have that conversation and say, this is what I've seen, this is what it feels like. Here's the historical piece of why this is uncomfortable for me. I understand, why we want to make this a experience that is warm and welcoming for everyone, but I'm the one who's singled out for this, and I really need to be seen in this particular light. Can we talk about what, again, fine, if this happens, if somebody else comes in and don't do that, or is there a way that we're going to kind of diversify across the board, so no matter what, everyone doing some version of this, so it's equal? I've definitely had those conversations during my career. What does that look like for you all? Have you been in situations where you've had this experience and brought it back and all right, we need a game plan?
Yes. I think when I was newer into fundraising, I think I was more conscious and just learning and trying to figure out how does this work? But for me, I think something that Donald has had with me is when I sit with my conviction, it's as a Black man and it's in the service of my students. And when I think about how, if we as staff are perpetuating some of these things, how might this show up in our marketing? How might this show up in our interactions with students? So to me, I feel like we have a responsibility to name it and to say it in a way where we need to really understand what this is from that historical current, what are we perpetuating? Because some folks I've seen have just been completely clueless. They're just like, oh, well, I thought you have this relationship and I didn't, I'm like, no, like it's cool, backtrack, but like, let's have this honest conversation. And I think for me, I've gotten a lot comfortable now, especially just like, yes, I'm gonna acknowledge my feelings or things in this moment, but this is in service of us trying to be excellent in our work and how we're trying to show up. And so for me, I've had those conversations with staff. I've had those conversations with former folks that I've had to work with, and just understanding this might be that impact intent conversation with folks of saying the impact that you had on this. I know the intent was well, but the impact you're having either on myself or on our students or our reputation in the community because of allowing this to exist can be harmful. And so I think those are some of the ways that I've entered those conversations, and now I'm ready to have those all the time so that we can be excellent in what we do.
And I didn't even talk about that reflection piece, but you're right. How are you reflecting that out to the in your case, the students, well, in both our cases, the students we work with. But then also, what does that communicate to the broader community if we say that this is an organization that stands for these values, but we treat people this way? It is a disconnect. So there's a really big piece about being true to who we say we are, what our missions are. Thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, and great point, Jordan. I just love that you ended with exercising that muscle, because I think that is kind of where I center it. For me, really, I look at those opportunities. I look at those moments where the microaggressions present itself, and sometimes macroaggressions. It's not even as subtle as you would hope it would be, as an opportunity for learning, and I have to, like you, continually exercise that muscle. Even in my current position, we meet with partners all the time, folks that want to do business with us, folks that we're trying to just align our mission and values with, and see how it can help to strengthen the organizations that we're serving. And I've had several moments where I am in the room with a staff team that I lead, and the person would just look at my white team member most of the conversation and just barely acknowledge sometimes that I'm there. And you have to be humble in those moments, but I think also really understanding that your role is, like Jordan said, to exercise that muscle continuously and be unafraid to have those conversations with the person, and also to position yourself to kind of be an example. It's a lot of burden, and I don't say every time is that time, because again, for your own self-preservation, for your self-care, for your peace of mind, you have to pick and choose when you can, but having the ability to say, okay, I feel what's going on. I've seen it before. And I understand how to kind of start to broach this conversation with this person so they can learn and grow in this space. Implicit bias is extremely real. I think we all swim in the pool of the notions and expectations and false ideals of who Black and brown people are, and no one is immune to that. So we all kind of hold these values. So when you buck up against that, just being, comfortable enough to say, okay, this is where we are, and this is how we could do this differently. And I think always by presenting the example of how it can be done differently in the future is beneficial.
I kind of think I came to this realization from doing the exact opposite, which is saying nothing. And so I actually used to be very quiet about it and be frustrated about things like that. But I think that as you kind of just grow in leadership, different capacities and role, you actually realize the value and power that your voice actually has. And I think that was something that was a little different for me, which I had to actually grow into that. I had all these thoughts, but I think something that separates just, again, another employee versus a leader in the employee is the person who's actually willing to seize the moment and actually speak up. And I think I waited until I would transition out of a role or a specific position or transition out of an organization to have that very frank conversation. And it was in that moment that they were so appreciative of the frankness and honesty that I had missed an opportunity that entire time that I was there to provide that opportunity for change in an organization. And so it was that aha moment once I left to be like, wow, I just did this organization a disservice by not actually adding that value and speaking up and creating moments of change and progress for that organization and the people that we get to impact, because those that we're impacting are minorities, are underserved folks. And so if there's actually a disconnect between leadership or just staff in general, donors, and those that we're actually servicing, me actually speaking up and creating those conversations in a comfortable space for them to be able to do it actually bridges that gap for more understanding, and the more passion and affinity these folks actually have with the students that we were serving, the more they actually were inclined to give more, honestly. And so I kind of felt like not having the confidence once upon a time hindered growth. And so I think after a year like 2020, and I just realized that there was no longer an option, that's when I actually think I grew as a fundraiser, because there was a certain level of authenticity that increased naturally. And so, and there was also a certain level of grace that I had to learn to have these difficult conversations time and time again, in the process of managing up and side by side, while also mentoring and grooming folks up. And so again, it was an aha moment transitioning from one role to the next.
You touched on this a little bit, but who actually gets a voice to be able to say what needs to be said and not feel like you're upsetting the paradigm in that hierarchical space that does kind of create, that tension on the fundraising side. I think there's a space where you need to feel comfortable enough in your abilities as a fundraiser, though it's recognized where you are, to then say, and I'm speaking with authority from this experience. I think I want to kind of underpin there. Because it's one thing to say you have the opinion, who actually gets heard in another story.
And I guess I realized that we all get heard, and then we all have a space and we all have a voice. And I used to see the hierarchy and stick with it. And then I started realizing that my manager at times, I guess in any role that I have, they also need to be empowered at times. And so I think that this is when you take, or when I take what I do professionally and then what I do outside of work, and I had to bring them all into the same space. Outside of work, what do? I mentor, I speak, I encourage people, I empower people, and I see where people have a room to grow, and I challenge them to be their best selves. And I was like, why am I not doing that here at my job and with my work? And so managing up was, it was one of the best things ever, because it's great for your supervisors to also trust and value what you have to say, and know that if I can empower them to say, hey, like, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm noticing, and then following it up with statistics and stats. This is what we're looking at a human level. If you are a data person, here are the actual numbers, and this is how it's affecting this organization. And sometimes I think while I may be able to speak from an emotional space, as I'm educating people, I can also bring in the numbers and just make things very black and white. And as I create that safe space for them to feel more and more comfortable talking about it, then we can appeal to multiple aspects, whether it's data, whether it's knowledge, intellect, and whether it's emotional, and bring them all in the same space so that we can really get down to the nitty gritty of the organization. And that's kind of how I do it.
Tiffany, I think I'm really resonating with that, because I think that was similar on my journey of kind of observing first and listening, but it makes me think about the larger fundraising field. And I'm wondering with like how many Black fundraisers are currently silent because of the work culture space that they're in, and as much labor that Black folks might be taking on creating a safe space, like how toxic or dangerous might the space be if they might not be the development director or in charge of fundraising. Because I remember there's a time for me where I worked with the development director, and her slogan, which I get, was impact drives income, impact drives income. Jordan, what's the story? What's the story? What's the story? What's the story? And even to me, to the point that you were talking about of like who decides what stories are shared, what is it? But for me, I was really sitting with how can we make sure that even in the fundraising space, that it is a psychological and physical safe space for Black folks to voice things? Because I know for me, it took a few years to be able to point out some of the things that I noticed, or where it's a little bit like, I don't know if we should really say it like that, because I think there's really some richness that some fundraising departments might be missing if some of the Black voices are being silenced, whether intentionally or unintentionally, but just by the design of the space and how it's being led or things like that.
Exactly. No, and I think we found a lot of ourselves. At least I definitely found that issue in my career early on. Where just trying to get in. I don't want to upset rock the boat a little bit, and I don't know what I don't know. So let me just figure out what these structures are. And I'm not. I'm in a little more of a senior role now, where I feel like I can own that space. And I similarly to you, Tiffany, really stepped into that last year. recognizing that if I don't do that, or if there are other people on my team who aren't willing to do that, we're going to have a problem because no one else is going to be able to bring that forward. So Tiffany, do you have any additional comment on that?
Yeah, I think I also realized when it's like, well, who has the authority to ask these questions? I started from the beginning. I did it in the interview just to see how it'd be received, to know if this is a space where my voice would actually be valuable. And so in preparing for an interview, looking through advertisement, again, saw that diversity was a goal of the organization, but I was like, I saw some things and I'm like, oh, this rubbed me the wrong way. So wonder, I brought those questions actually to the interview to say, okay, I see this. Is this because you're taking steps forward and the language that was used could have been off-putting, but you were actually trying? And if so, I started the education from the moment of the interview to see how it was received. It was received well. And before even getting the job, if you can see that progress, make me very confident in creating that space where you can only bring me on if you find value in what I'm going to contribute to this organization.
Thank you for bringing that up. Let's talk about that, because I think there's a lot of control that we see sometimes in the interview process as we're looking for opportunities. I had a great mentor who told me, this is an audition for you as well. It's not just pick me, I'm amazing. It's also, and what can you do for me, long-term and short-term. And a part of that is diversity. And you can ask those questions, especially if the organization's put out there that this is a priority. What exactly does that mean? Like I have my version of, asking those questions, kind of, what diversity statements look like, how, one of my favorite questions now is, how is the school, and I'm usually in academia, how is the school looking at addressing some of the systemic issues that have been, just a part of academia writ large, not necessarily your institution, but how are you thinking about that? And how are you communicating that to your alumni or your donors? And the answers are varied. But they give you an insight into who's thinking about it or who really is kind of not ready to address that. And then I think you can find your space in that. So are there things like that you looked at over the years, or that you you're passively kind of tapping in, or you're actively pursuing? When people say diversity is important to them, like, how do you bring that out as you're assessing your next move, if you have?
So for me, I think a lot of people are right now really poised to answer that DEI, positioning statement. For me, it's more important to find out about the culture of your organization and how you define that culture. I think culture is something that has lived within most, established organizations for a while. And the leader of that organization, the HR manager, the hiring person, should clearly be able to say, what is that like heart feel that drives us as an organization? And I think in there, if they don't mention diversity as a part of their culture, then look out, because they're easily going to read that blanket statement that they've, memorized and now have to put out there for X number of reasons. So even with the organization that I am connected to, I've been a part or connected to people within the organizations for years. And I knew that it was a very family-centered organization. I could look at the staff and I could see the diversity. And then I knew the mission of what they were doing within the communities that I wanted to serve. So I wasn't really very interested in finding out what their statement was on equity and diversity, but I wanted to know the culture. And also the second piece that I look for very clearly is their philosophy on professional development, right? And how, because a lot of times that is unfortunately where we as people of color find ourselves deficited, because we don't get those opportunities as they, are afforded to other people. So I want to hear about how you bring equity in leveling the playing field for staff that you may have seen, fall short in a few areas, how you build them up. And that to me gives me a better window into who they are versus asking that DEI question.
And holistic too, in the way that they're coaching outside and they're coaching inside, and how where you're going to be positioned in that too. If you're going to be the fixer, is that a role you want to play, or is that a role that you're comfortable playing but with some parameters and you get to negotiate that? So yeah, I think all of that is related. Let's pivot a little bit. Let's talk about taking care of ourselves, and because we have these jobs are hard. We hear no a lot. We have to kind of think creatively. Sometimes you're thinking, beyond your experience to create a space and an experience that is engaging for that person. That's not necessarily engaging for you. So, it's always about the next person and how you fit into that. And then there's just the mask we wear as people of color going into these spaces where you're sometimes the only. How do you protect yourself when it gets really tough? And what does support look like for you?
I'll say having a Black woman as a boss is incredible. Just because when things happen, it's like, did you see that? Like, and we both get it. Like, we both are like, oh, like you saw that? Like, say what? Like, so that's, I didn't even realize almost how therapeutic it is to have someone with you in the spaces, especially at fundraising events. If someone says something like just unnecessary and both of y'all there, and also just being able to check one another, call each other in and be like, hey, like, you need to take 5, if you need to take a second, like go grab some water and just like recenter yourself. That's been super helpful for me. And I think for me, this work, especially when working with young people in education, especially when this stuff gets really tough, when someone says something or does something, I just really am able to connect with the student or stay grounded in the mission and really be reminded of this is why this is worth it. And then for me, I just go back to like, I'm not selling tape. So it's a lot better than selling tape for me too. And so I think that's been helpful. And then outside of that, therapy is important, keep your mental health strong. So definitely recommend that. And then just other ways just to celebrate life in community with folks and having that space for me with people who get it. So whether it's NSBE, whether it's just young professionals where folks can get together and be like, girl, I had like this happened today. Like, yo, let me tell you about mine. It's almost just like a community, just like release sigh. And those for me are just refreshing, good, and energizing to go back and to continue the work even longer. Because I think in those spaces, we're also reminded of like our histories, where we come from, the strength that's within us. And this is going to be frustrating, but it's not going to overtake or stop the work that's going to go forward.
I just want to underscore that having a person in leadership who has the same experience, who can check in with you so you don't feel like you're just hitting your head against. So I second that so much. But it does make a difference in what, like, A, you're not going crazy. This isn't something you're making up. But 2, okay, we can tag team this. And one of us is going to have the face that we're going to have to pull together. And the other person is going to be able to address that. Like, that's real in the moment. Anybody else have something similar?
I just want to second therapy. I am so happy that I see my Black brothers and sisters going. I'm always encouraging them, like, go find you one. Because I think that, especially with the uproar from last year, I think people got really good at creating boundaries for other people and not realizing how many boundaries I had to actually create for myself. And I think once I became stronger in creating those boundaries for myself, it was no brainer to create boundaries for other people. I didn't even second guess it, not one bit. I don't feel bad when I take PTO. I don't feel bad when I realize that I need to take just time to myself. Because I also think that, I'm a believer in like the better person you are and the better healthy state that you are in, the better fundraiser you're in. And I think that as a fundraiser, like my donors can pick up authenticity like really quickly. And I think I don't ask for feedback per se, but the number one thing that I'll say ending a call is there's something about you that's so refreshing and contagious in a good way. And I just can smile and just say thank you, and knowing that look, I'm just showing up and I'm just being me and my whole self with my whole passion for what we're doing and the work that we're doing. So I just take time. And like the last call we were on, people were talking about having a personal board. It's like, I have mentors. Great. I have some that I talk to frequently, monthly. I have some that I talk to annually. Shout out to that advice from you, Tamika. And then I also have, they're not like my work friends, but like my industry friends. And I specifically chose them to be like, hey, I need to vent this out, but then brainstorm. And I think that having those spaces to to vent things out, but to actually problem solve and be intentional about that moving forward has helped me just grow as a fundraiser and to be mentally healthy to do the work that we do and to handle being a Black fundraiser.
Thank you for that shout out. Appreciate that. And I do want to dive into that a little bit too, because I think that's an often overlooked issue, that we don't take charge of our professional development and really prepare ourselves for spaces. Sometimes it's, yes, we are overlooked, but sometimes we need to push a little bit harder to make sure we are prominent enough. So let's go back to that. Adama, thoughts?
So my thoughts, the first piece, let me talk a little bit about the last question. For me, it's my group of Black female professionals. I'm so lucky. A lot of them are just brilliant women. And I mean, that group specifically, because it's a reflection of myself, you know, it's like looking in the mirror and talking to them about my professional experience and being there also for them. I think reciprocity in these relationships that we have with folks is really, really important. You know, you can't just have people as a sounding board. You also have to be, you know, an absorber and a reflector as well. And it's really important also as a Black professional to know that, because we a lot of times have to be more than just like a sounding board. I've had to be the strength for some people as they've been going through things, you know, in their professional career. I've seen people broken by things, you know, in professional spaces that have been said to them. So I think the importance of that, just our community, and definitely a community that really just reflects who you are. And I think the second piece that I always laugh about is I just take my toes on the road, and it can be a $2 trip to, you know, Fort Lauderdale Beach. And you'll see me on Instagram or Facebook, you know, snapping the 10 toes, because I have to, that's my, you know, additional form of therapy. Like Tiffany and Jordan, I strongly believe in formal therapy, psychology major, you know, through, you know, education. And I strongly think mental health is a real thing. We would take care of any part of our body that got injured or hurt. If something hit your, you know, finger, you're taking it to the doctor. If you drop something on your toe, you're taking it to the doctor. So, you know, realizing that we're whole people, and, you know, our mental health is a part of that as well. So that's the second, you know, just taking myself wherever I need to be to have solitude, or to take my 6-year-old, you know, and my significant other, you know, along with me, to be in a space that just kind of helps to refuel me. And like Tiffany said, also not being afraid to ask for time when I need it. And that comes in a lot of different forms, time on the job, because we're going through a big transition now internally. And I found myself at a place where I just couldn't have clarity. And I realized, you know, verbalizing that time in that space is necessary. Stopping, pausing, putting things on hold, completely, you know, redesigning whatever it was that I could do so it fit into, you know, a framework that was manageable. So just giving that self-love, you know, is really important.
And yeah, I'm going to underscore therapy as well, because I think, you know, it's an organ like any other part of your body. And if you're not, you won't always be 100% everywhere. But if your brain would function, like controls the whole thing, if that's not functioning the way it needs to, you're no use to yourself, you're no use to anybody else. So yeah, big shout out to therapy. Go get some. But yeah, I think that piece about the mentorship and what we do to get ourselves prepared, or even just to check in with people. There are a group of people that I rely on campus and off campus. And there are moments when you have, you know, something happens and the face falls a little bit, and you need a closed door, like, I just need to throw something session and make that, and, you know, just to get it out, just, you know, I need to check this against you. I need you to tell me if I'm off base. What am I missing? What's going on? I'm just mad. Or, okay, I need strategy now. Here's what I'm seeing. Here's what I'm looking at. Here's where I project myself out in 5 years. What are the gaps? Or if I don't have any gaps, why don't I feel good enough about putting myself forward for this kind of opportunity? Like, talk about building out that support structure, whether they're in industry with you or they're in different areas. How do you choose those people? How do you give back? I really do feel like having, you know, for me, having mentors, having sponsors, having, you know, a really good group of girlfriends has been instrumental in me feeling like I can go back in and do this again. And I can turn around and help somebody else and bring that experience out. So I've benefited greatly from that. What does that personal board look like for all of you? Brendan, I'm going to pick on you.
On me? Okay. All right. Sounds good. it's dynamic. I think similar to what Tiffany said. In working in kind of like fundraising and education, just having different folks that I can go to for, like you all mentioned, to strategize, to address things, to problem solve. So and also I appreciate what you said about having sponsors. So folks that can advocate for me in different spaces that might be at different levels that can help me and help me get there faster. So for me, mine's very intentional. I actually send out an email once a month to folks that are sponsors with just updates on my life, just to keep in their mind and let them know about things, and to possibly ask questions as I'm developing in my continued professional career. And then there's a lot of folks, exactly like what Tiffany said, where every 2 or 3 weeks, or at least once a month, I'm just touching base with folks. And I've appreciated that those relationships, as Adam mentioned, are reciprocal, where we have an understanding where we might just touch base once a month, once every few months, but when we talk, like, it's real. We know we have mad love for each other and we support each other. So for me, my personal board is dynamic, diverse, and it's been supportive to me, and having different folks you can pull on, because sometimes the greatest therapy session can just be laughing with your friends, because to me, I also see Black joy as a form of resistance. And so I think sometimes that can just be a dynamic space to hold as well. So I hope that answered it. Yes.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. So I can pivot a little bit. There are a couple questions in the chat that relates to another topic we wanted to talk about, prospecting and figuring out our donor pipelines, how to get in the door. I think this has been changing over the years, and I've been in the profession where it's not so much of a surprise when I'm the person who's sitting across from donor X, talking to them about fiscal structures and what could be tax advantaged. But there was a little bit of a shock when I first started. So I'm wondering how, that is definitely in the vein of a pipeline that is, very traditional, very white, very male. Those are where the decisions are usually made. Those are a lot of seats of power in a lot of organizations. We are starting to see this generational shift now. And I'm wondering how you bring that part of, your experience, or people let's say, you people in the church who are well positioned. They may not have a lot of capacity, but they're well positioned and they can open doors. How are you bringing that in to build out your pipelines, your prospecting pipelines, as you do this work in volunteer capacity or in a giving capacity?
I'm going to reference something I said earlier, just looking at if I'm looking at my role and diversifying my own personal role first. And so if I'm doing community presentations, let me look at the NSBE chapter. It's like, I work with friends who are already in these organizations, just sharing our mission and sharing our story with them to see who's actually interested and who have different affinities. Sharing our mission with my boyfriend, and he's like, oh, well, so-and-so down at the Olympic Center, he does a lot of work with foster youth. He's like, have you ever reached out? That's a friend who is a multi-Olympian who promotes foster youth, but I never thought to actually reach out and bring them into my world of professional. I've always kept everything separate. So reaching out to him to see what work has he done, and to see like in what ways he'd want to partner with us and or volunteer or connect us with other people. But I think the community organizations and just getting other folks who may have affinity with our mission has been important. And then outside of that, I think the follow-up, I think early on, people think networking is just going out and meeting people, but I think the change actually happens in the networking and the successful networking, not just meeting them, but setting up that engagement plan, even for your networking circle, because there's so many people who, if you just blatantly ask them, what is your capacity in getting involved with our organization? They're like, honestly, I have a newborn, I have 3 other this, and that, and I can't help, but I actually know this person, and this organization who would love to hear your story. Immediately in my next one-on-one with my supervisor, I'm bringing all those under new ideas with an actual plan to begin engaging them. And then just simply saying thank you. There's been some donors who have given mid-level gifts of 1,000 plus who never received a thank you. I said thank you, and he's like, great, I want to give you another 1,000. And not leaving that conversation without scheduling the next like, I want to know why. Like, it's not just about the money, but actually understanding the story behind the gift. Because it's that story behind the gift that helps you expand that one gift and multiply it into awareness to other folks. So again, just to wrap that up, I said a lot of different things. One, community, getting into different spaces. Two, reaching out to my personal network of influencers who may be great to start off as ambassadors and may have the potential to become donors later. And then three, just realizing that our donors are people. And as I take them out of the giving space, which they're doing naturally, if I can actually understand why they keep doing it, I can actually multiply that one gift and then influence of that one gift to other areas.
For me, I think one of the important gifts that I got and lessons that I learned early on is to stop looking at people in a one-dimensional way. And I think a lot of times we do that so often in our professional careers, and we don't think about the depth of everyone. I mean, thinking of yourself, how many hats can you wear? You know, mother, daughter, sister, aunt, niece. So I engage folks on that level, and there's been so much benefit to that. I'll give two quick examples. We had someone on my board that was the leader of a really big local tech company. And, you know, had I just looked at him in one dimension and just said, okay, he can be on the board and help us with all of our tech needs, but through, you know, really engaging with him as a member and then just creating a relationship with him, I found out that he had a near drowning experience. And that's a huge part of what we did at the Y. And that was a completely different dimension. It probably was one of the drivers that connected him to the organization at the time. And it became a big expansive thing of how he connected with us as an organization and a big driver for how he would donate. Secondly, we had a vendor that we use very regularly for all of our paper goods and some of our other basic products. And again, it could have been that one-dimensional transactional relationship, but again, getting to know the two owners, finding out that, you know, they grew up in the inner city of Miami and had been those, you know, the families that we are trying to serve. You know, that relationship completely changed. And they not only gave in terms of dollars, but they also gave in terms of time. They would drop off supplies for events and stay and volunteer. They would engage with the families, and the richness and depth that came from not keeping that relationship on that one-dimensional, again, level, and having that reciprocity with them. They, you know, benefited from being able to give back now to communities that they help to service, and, you know, through their business, but now also personally. So it's really making sure that you look at people in a very dynamic way and not a flat way.
I love that.
So, and I love that you brought in the gifts of, you know, gifts in kind, which, you know, go a long way, especially if you're, you know, that's what the capacity of somebody can bring to you. That's cash in the door that you use for other things now. And it takes care of a really pressing need that you might have. And valuing that the same way, which I think is a little easier when you can kind of put a dollar value to that. But what it brings up for me is valuing time, which is a lot harder to assign like an equivalent cash value to, but that's a resource that doesn't come back. You lose it. It goes out, there's no replenishing it, there's no going out and earning more, it's gone. But we don't really value that the same way. And I think a lot of our groups, a lot of our communities of color, a lot of our diverse communities, they can give time. They can roll up their sleeves and get in there and do the work and strategize and talk about things, but we don't value that the same way. So they don't get a chance to be decision makers behind the door. Any thoughts on how, you know, I think boards are probably the closest way we can think about this, but how do you create access for people who intimately understand what you do, but don't necessarily get to get the top to run that in? Have you had any conversations with your teams about that? I know we are here at UC San Diego and trying to think about that differently, but what does that look like for all of you?
I guess it's a little different because I'm an annual giving manager, so that's everyone I work with. And it's also, I mean, when I think about how I want to grow in the fundraising industry, it's hard for me to want to leave annual giving because I'm like, these are the folks who I'm working with that mindset of, I want the folks who are giving $25 or $50 or even $500 to still feel the same type of appreciation and inclusion as the folks who are giving those major gifts. Because who knows, like, I don't know, I find so many different ways to transform their lives, and they thought they were giving us a gift. I end up giving them just a gift of my time. and they feel encouraged and empowered. And as they grow, they typically end up giving even more, or they end up giving even more again in terms of dollars or time or being an ambassador. And so I think that the hardest part is that I can't give them one-on-one attention the way our major gift officers can give their donors. But what I can do is host more frequent small events. And so what I try and do is if I'm only one person, and again, as a Black fundraiser, you're managing a lot of different things in your head and in your life. What I try and do is create those community amongst other people. This empowerment is not something that I'm holding on to. I'm growing in it and I'm passing it on. And the biggest thing I can do is to empower other people to do exactly what I'm doing so that this can continue and continue to spread true diversity. So if I have these smaller groups of donors, I want to introduce them to other donors who are just like them, and invite them into these spaces. And just like you could have a one-on-one dinner with a major donor or a one-on-one this, I have little communities and herds of that. And guess what? As you do that, you begin to see who has natural leadership qualities, or as they want to grow with their impact and their involvement, they start looking at you saying, how can I better get involved? And that's when you can actually start growing and grooming and empowering them to step up. And we've had several donors who say, I actually want to learn more about the fundraising you guys are doing. I've been interested in fundraising. That's like, I never hear that. So I'm like, oh yes, let's schedule some time to talk, because if they're actually interested, volunteers are interested in fundraising, we're taking this to a whole nother level now. So again, to answer the question directly, I do that by creating communities of them, since I don't have the capacity for that one-on-one space.
And that's building the pipeline. That's exactly like identifying and qualifying the folks who could potentially move up the ranks and really be identified and have that deeper relationship, but probably get missed somewhere along the line if we're not attentively looking at that and seeing the possibilities. I think there's a lot of folks who just look at annual giving and go, well, they're giving here at this capacity, and leave it at that. We're dealing with the masses, where a major gifts person could really be an annual giving prospect, and is sending that test gift. They're waiting for you to kind of pick it up, and you're not picking up the signals, so they're going to stay here. Gifts don't fall off the tree if you don't ask for them. So that's important work, and I think often overlooked.
Yeah, and I think for us, very similar to what Tiffany had said, I think one of our first things was making sure that we're dignifying all gifts. Like, to one person, a gift for $1 million might be like $1, but to another person, a gift of $1 is like $1 million to them. And so really appreciating all the gifts that we're getting from different folks. We just started a professional mentorship program for our program grads and for our high school students, as just different ways that folks could kind of come in and learn more about the organization, to kind of build out a deeper pipeline from folks from different industries to meet with students. We just started a young women's leadership series for young professionals trying to develop. And we're always trying to bring in just different folks to kind of meet our students. Because for us, we know once you meet a student, like the impact, you can see them and you can work with them and walk alongside of them. And so like that, we know that's impactful. But for us, it's kind of dignifying all gifts. And even we understand now, for our organization, we have 3,000 program grads. Eventually they could turn into donors, but meeting them where they're at. Because we also know too, if students, they graduate college or maybe a few years out, we're like, hey, raise $1,000 for reality changers. That might not be realistic, especially knowing some of the backgrounds or families that our students are coming from, but saying like, hey, you really can give time, or if you give $5 a month, like really even look at monthly continual donations as a way to kind of fundraise. So we've really just been trying to say, where can we meet folks where they're at, understanding what their capacity is to give, and eventually trying to expand that, but really meeting them where they're at with a variety of different opportunities.
And I think bringing them behind the curtain a little bit. And, I know we work in very similar types of students, very similar backgrounds. And I've taken, my personal commitment has been, someone pulled me along. I'm first generation fundraising looked very, very different from the industry that we're in right now. Here's what I've learned along the way. There's a space for you in this, whether or not you choose to be on the fundraising side as a professional, or you become a philanthropist in your own way. But here are the types of tools that you should be looking for. Here are the types of things you might want to even negotiate for on your job. You have the capacity to do that. But if you're first generation and your parents have never been in the space and you have nowhere to ask, who tells you that? But you could get there, but who tells you that? And so I take that as a personal kind of thing. I pull these kids aside. You're going to Yale next year. Here's where Yale's going to get you. Here's what Yale's going to ask you for when you graduate. Remember us. Remember what this looks like for us, and remember the kids that you're going to go. So yeah, selfish plug, but here's what the expectation is of you now because you're in that seat. And here are all the things that come along with that. And you have the permission to ask for that. And I see the light bulb. Yeah, now I just need to do that 1,000 times. but that's where they're going to go. And our kids end up there. I think this does kind of dovetail nicely into one of the questions I'm seeing here in the Q&A. And just a reminder to everyone who's here, we are going to actively be looking at that. So if anything's popped in for you, please send us a question and we'll get to that. How, if at all, do you change your fundraising approaches or strategies based on the audience, especially when your organization might be more demographically homogeneous? So if you're speaking to, say, primarily minoritized group versus a non-minoritized group or in-group. I know personally for me, a donor is a donor is a donor, and so I don't really change that. But you do read the room a little bit more and then assess what's needed. And sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't, but it definitely depends on the space for me. So I'd love to hear thoughts from all of you. My prospect pool in full transparency is a much more diversified university space. And so in that we have folks who are interested in education, but might be interested in the undergraduate and graduate experience of that versus, say, the K through 12 experience of that. We are a K through 12 school in a tertiary institution. So that is a weird dynamic to kind of work through. There's a lot of education and then there's a lot of, kind of just exposure that we have to bring in, but there's no like income. There's no directly related donor base for the Poise School, where I say the School of Engineering. Yeah, you've got 30,000 alumni you can go talk to immediately. They get it, they understand it, they've been through it. So my approach has been this: here's who we are. Doesn't matter where you're coming from with this. You understand the basis of an accessible education that's strong and what that can do for everybody, and that's what we're trying to replicate here. So what does that look like for all of you in terms of, either changing your strategy or not?
I think one of the fundamentals that I learned initially was, really connecting with the person and figuring out why they've connected with your organization in the first place. And you start there with that opening conversation and that opening opportunity for them to tell their story. And I think when you really, drive it from that perspective, it really doesn't make a difference who you're having the conversation with, regardless of their background. When I learned a big lesson, coming from a space where we were serving these communities and there were expectations of what the parents can do. They were not all single parent households, but a lot of them were located in underserved communities. They were, located in communities that were more economically challenged. But when we started having these conversations with the parents about the benefits of the program and what it's doing for their family, they found means. And when they didn't find means, they found a way to connect with someone that could help them, reach the goal for our particular centers or that program around fundraising. So I think really just not counting people out and engaging with them to see why they're there to connect with you in the first place. And when you center that, more than likely you're gonna, hit a home run. It may not be $1 million, but everything counts. As Jordan said early on, every gift is significant. And I think that person, being positioned to even be a storyteller. Most of our fundraising campaign, when I was with the Y, was centered on the volunteers. It wasn't centered around staff. Our commitment was first because we needed to make that commitment to serve as the foundation for the large team of volunteers that, did the majority of our fundraising. So, and just kind of finding out from those individual parents and loved ones and grandparents who connected why they were there.
I think I'm the exact same. Just understanding what brought them to kind of interested in this, or is it a Rotary Club that cares about service? I will say this though, the delivery of the explanation of the services, if it's to a group of folks that, you know, is a primarily white audience, I am very careful because there have been times where I feel like sometimes there might be some stereotypes or biases that people are holding that they're looking for, unconsciously looking for, that might perpetuate the idea of these minoritized communities are all committing crime and selling drugs and involved in gangs and all these types of things. So we come from a very strength-based approach, and it's that delicacy of making sure we're sharing the realities. There are real challenges that are facing communities, and also here's how we want you to be a kind of ally, co-conspirator in this work with us in a way that's not like, I am out here, you know, the white savior complex. I'm out here saving all these poor Black kids in the hood because they can't read or spell or things like that. And making sure that we're very careful that none of our messaging or marketing in an audience that might be more intentional to catch on to that, whether it's one sentence or one word, because there's been times that I remember when I was earlier in my career, I'd done a presentation and you say all these strength-based things, and they will come to me afterwards and be like, so none of your kids can read? I was like, come on, that's not what I said. I was like, so I think I'm just very careful and intentional and understanding where folks are at. I'm not going to assume I know where everyone's at. And also, I think just stewarding the stories that we hold in a careful way so that folks can come along as allies and co-conspirators in the work.
Definitely want to build up that capacity for allyship in a very constructive way, and making sure that we also are protecting our students, protecting our community. You know, we need those stories, and they're compelling. We want them to be out there, but there's a way to tell that story that doesn't feel like you're taking advantage of. And it's a delicate balance. So, you know, how do you inspire some philanthropy, especially significant philanthropy, without even further minoritizing people who already feel that there's no in for them? This is, you know, there are no exceptional stories here. Anyone can have a chance if you give them an opportunity. And so, yeah, thanks for bringing that forward.
And Tamika, great point, because it also is important to give people a platform to speak in their own voice and not to be the intermediary for folks, and allow them that space and the power to tell their own story.
Yeah, exactly.
What was I getting ready to say to that? I think that can sometimes be challenging, just in general, to adjust, because I think I'm always trying to, I'm always going to do essentially like a predisposition on who's actually going to be attending this event. And I try and do it on as many folks as I can who will be attending that, so I can get an understanding of who they are, while also acknowledging that this is based on me just like reading things, and that this doesn't define who they are, but it helps me have an understanding of who I'm speaking to. Just, I think, just like internally when I'm having conversations with other colleagues and things like that, that, I don't know, I'm trying to educate while also doing my job. I think I do the same thing in terms of a larger audience. And then I think the last thing that I do is keep philanthropy at the forefront. I think with certain, say we're with a group, a minority group, you can't make the assumption that they don't have the capacity to give. But I think historically, when you think all the way back, sometimes you think about slavery, you think about all these different things. It is this historical thing that at times in our culture that there's a lot of skepticism. Even if someone is passionate about something, if they didn't find you on their own and you're asking, sometimes you can be met with, what do you really want? Even if you are sharing exactly what you want and exactly what you need. And so I think I do that not to attach an identity or a stereotype to a group of people, but I do that so that I know how to respond if I am met with that. While also creating the space and giving people the chance to do something different. I never want to limit someone from doing something different, because if people are like, oh, well, all people are skeptical, and then I was in that little room and I'm like always optimistic about everything, I would want someone to give me the room to do something different. So again, if I'm speaking to a certain minority group or a group of folks who I know don't have a philanthropic history, then that conversation has an educational philanthropic promotion ingrained into that spiel, and empowerment in that spiel of giving back. If I'm speaking to a faith-based organization who they have this ingrained mindset of tithing and a commitment to tithing, then I acknowledge that in that conversation with that faith-based group, that they already acknowledge that they're doing that. So maybe my spiel will be about going above and beyond and outside of just that space. And then if I'm talking to a group, a non-minority group, guess what? I'm going to be that voice, and I'm going to plug in some diversity and what we can do there. So again, I think the biggest thing is predispositioning who's in that room, understanding what I could face, and also allow room for something to be different. Because I don't want to assume that that non-minority group wouldn't be open to what I need to say. And who knows what allies are in that group. And I can start blending these groups so I'm not having these separate spaces all the time.
Two things I want to underscore what you're saying there. The self-awareness that I think we all have to have, regardless of what race you are, the self-awareness of, what is your role in this space today, and how can you best move that conversation? And that sometimes means I'm not the right person. Like being able to understand that it's not about you, it's about the organization, and who is going to be best to communicate this or to get people on board so that you can advance the mission forward. I think that's a really, really important thing that people overlook. It's not about you, it's about the organization and what's best serving that, and then the community you serve. And then two, that philanthropy isn't new to organizations, to communities. There is a culture of philanthropy that exists in every single society and every single culture that we know of. We may call it something different. We talked about tithings, Tiffany. There is a version of that everywhere. People have for millennia come together to help each other out. That is how communities thrive and move forward. We're not teaching people about philanthropy. We are deepening into whatever philanthropy means for them, and then maybe introducing them to this version of it, but the culture exists, and that's not something that we have to recreate or reveal. So I think that dovetails nicely into that conversation that we're having. But there's also this question about barriers to fundraising for nonprofits serving racial or ethnic groups versus those that are focused on social challenges, and they may not necessarily intersect the race and ethnicity of social causes. I'm trying to read into this a little bit, but what I'm getting from that is, are there barriers when we're talking about, say, a cause-based group that may or may not fit into a racial structure, like a specific racial organization? So to the person who asked this question, if I'm not getting this right, please send it back in again. But I think it's worth kind of talking about, advancing things that may have an EDI component, equity, diversity, and inclusion component, that don't call it out specifically, and how we integrate that in our talking points or integrate that in our marketing. We try to do that at UC San Diego. I think sometimes it's really difficult to do that with an enterprise that is as large as we are and does as many things as we do. But it is woven into a lot of the things that we do talk about. It's not this kind of thing over in the corner. But is that something that either that any of you have ever had to kind of think about as you're presenting your case statement first, and then how this affects the community in this particular way?
To Jordan's point, definitely. I think consciously all the time I have to think about not troping people and not turning them into characters, because it's initially what people think of when they think about giving to communities of color and underserved communities and under-resourced communities. So, not being a part of perpetuating those stereotypes and, kind of fueling people's implicit bias is always at the top of my mind. More than so a lot lately, taking a strength-based approach from even my mindset, because again, I'm a strong believer in everyone swims in the pool. You think those thoughts, and you've learned different things about certain communities that have been just ingrained in you from when you start getting an idea of who you are and who the outside world is. So reconditioning and reprogramming myself to know that I have to take a strength-based approach, and there's strength in every community, for people to overcome and to be resilient in a lot of these circumstances that they have to live in, to be able to be that first generation college student, to be able to be that single parent, however you became a single parent, that now has to navigate your life and the life of children and all the other safety concerns and security concerns and issues that come with just being alive. So I think really taking the strength-based approach and not playing into keeping people in a deficited place, in other folks' mindset is big.
I'm not sure if I'm answering the question or fully understanding it, but I think when I looked at the question, I think it's a matter of like the framing for the entry point of the conversation about what work is being done. And what I mean by that is, like, for example, us at Reality Changers, we primarily serve, well, actually, like all of our students, primarily students of color. However, our social issue is education access. And so I think depending on the audience that we're speaking to, we might hit more on the education access, but underneath that is kind of all the social challenges that are plaguing kind of the BIPOC community. And so I think it's, to me, it's more so like a framing of that conversation, but I'm not entirely sure if I'm answering that correctly. So I think just read that again.
I think you're right on. It's yeah, it's a delicate balance, I think.
Yeah, because my thought is as well as any social issue that we're talking about, underneath it, we could intersect and tease out any type of identity to talk about how race might be implicated in that social issue. And whether you're talking about disabilities or just any type of thing, you could always unpack how race is impacting it. And so I think it's more so the framing based off of where the organization's at. Do you want to talk about how this is impacting a specific ethnic community? And so I think that's, yeah. I'll pause there.
I know we're getting close to time. I do have one more question, and this is more of a tactical one. If your supervisor has no fundraising experience and they do not invest time in learning about what you do and what strategies are behind that, how do you navigate that? I'm assuming, I want to take the assumption here that you are maybe the first or the second fundraiser who's been hired into the organization because the board has said you need money. Find a way to get some revenue in, or we need a philanthropic structure. Hire someone, build it. And the leadership doesn't quite understand what building that means, maybe the time that is required to put into that. I'm not sure if anyone on this team has that experience specifically. I know I certainly don't. I've always been in a space where philanthropy is just part of the organization, and so I'm fitting in. But has, I can speak anecdotally about that. So I'd love to just kind of hear how you, I guess in this case, it would be goal set. When you come in with an organization that even has a culture, it's kind of set. How do you determine success as a fundraiser for that group?
I guess first, I go back to very specific examples that I guess I can't go into the details of, but it goes back to self-advocacy. I think sometimes having a supervisor with no fundraising experience, some of the telltale signs will be some unrealistic fundraising expectations. And you have to, if you know what you're doing and you see that you are running into roadblocks with the goals that they've set out versus what you have to work with versus your capacity or whatever the issue may be, you have to advocate and bring that to the forefront. And at times, again, if they don't see it, bring in the numbers to show how realistic. If you can't do it with just your numbers, bring up the national numbers. I think as a fundraising industry, they have so many national and regional numbers to support your work and your efforts. And if not, that is why we go back to that personal board of learning how to navigate that situation. I think sometimes having a supervisor with no fundraising experience, me personally, I've had this happen twice. One great, one not so great. They were brought into that role because they did have something to bring to that team. But again, it also goes to managing up, just like they were bringing such a new perspective to that role. I think that I had to be sure that I committed myself to teaching them about the fundraising role as well. And if organizationally, we're always trying to encourage people like on our board to learn how to be storytellers and to let that sell and be fundraisers, then I think that we have a right for someone who is managing a fundraiser to also be empowered to do the same, to understand what we're doing. I think that if you have someone who's your supervisor who literally has no idea and understanding of the fundraising, there's a disconnect there, because the better they understand, just like programs, if they better understand development, if development better understands them, if we better understand our board and who's governing the organization, more people get to benefit from that. And so another thing is, just like I'm a student of the industry, like I would hope that my boss would at least model that as well. And again, if you can be able to share, if you have goals and you're being assessed, most likely your supervisor has goals and they're being assessed as well. So if you don't want it to be an emotional conversation, just do something as simple as look to see, does their goals align with your goals? Because sometimes there'll be also a disconnect with that as well. So I found myself having to advocate for things to be realistic in terms of those goals. And I'd rather blow them out of the water than to have unrealistic expectations and all of the weight fall on me when I'm actually doing a great job at what I'm doing, if I might say so myself.
I think if you continue to continue to be employed, then yes, you will. Anybody, any other thoughts on this?
Just from a practical perspective, and it's more like a professional development like trick that you can employ. And this is making the assumption that the in other ways the person really is a good supervisor and they're gonna be there to help you develop. So I would say engage them in a problem and make it one problem centered around the thing that you do, and bring them in and ask them, hey, I really want to be successful at this, but I don't know how to figure out this part. And in explaining and integrating them into the problem solving process, educate them as well on what you're doing and why it's important and how it benefits into the global picture of your department or your organization. And I think a lot of times when people are a problem, part of the solution, they look at what's happening in a different way. It takes it from a strength-based perspective for your supervisor, and they will feel like they're benefiting you in doing the job, but you can kind of sprinkle the little bits of learning and just continue to, engage them through that way.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think I'll, as you were talking about this, the closest I can think of is working with faculty members who are subject matter experts in their field, but don't necessarily understand what it takes to fund that from a philanthropic standpoint, traditional individual giving, corporate giving structures. And just getting a feel for what that looks like for them, what their expectations were, maybe a negative experience they've had or a positive experience, just kind of explaining what your process is. I've gone as far as taking faculty on the road with me so that they get to sit in those conversations and have those, those experiences. And I prep them for that. These are the types of questions I'm going to ask. These are the types of things that we're going to do. I'm going to tee it up so you can talk about your work. Just be yourself. Just talk about what it means. I'm not going to put you in a situation where people are going to be staring at you and not understanding what you're looking at, what you're explaining. They're probably going to be alumni who studied in your field, or they're working in the industry, just in industry. And just kind of bring it along that way. But I always emphasize that fundraising is fundraising. It's building relationships, it's building trust. It takes time. And if you hire somebody and expect them to come in immediately and just pull out a Rolodex of folks and just be able to make phone calls and make things happen, it doesn't always work that way. First off, if you're a fundraiser in an organization, those donors that you're working with are the relationship is with the fundraiser. You may have a great relationship with that fundraiser, but those donors are for that organization. There's an ethical piece there that you cannot cross. Second off, building relationships, understanding what the opportunities are, that takes time for our leadership to get on board with, and also donors to come meet you there. And if there's no strategy at the top, if you cannot articulate what the strategy is, the fundraiser cannot do their job. So we need you to tell us what the vision is, and we can go sell the dream. But if there's no dream, with no vision, there's no dream to sell. It's one and the same, and that's something you can work on together. So hopefully that's helpful to you as you're navigating spaces. I think we're just a little bit over time now, so I'm going to wrap up. Tiffany, Jordan, I don't know, thank you so much for making time today in the middle of your day. I appreciate getting to know you all a little bit more, and we'll keep in touch. And thank you all for being here and joining us for this really important conversation. It's not over. Continue to think about what your space is and your capacity is in this conversation, how you can be an ally to some of your colleagues, or how you can help open up conversations in your spaces in your department so that we can move this forward. A friendly reminder that the slide deck and the recording will be sent in the following days for you to review at your leisure. We'd like to highlight some of the additional upcoming sessions. The Center for Creative Leadership MBA will be holding a webinar next week on the 26th on workplace inclusion, understanding how bias is key. You can check out their additional offerings. And for more on the Fundraising Academy, all of our live webinars and the full list of on-demand videos are listed on our website. Don't miss out on the next one on September 15th with Ryan Gennard, Director of Development for the University of Texas at Austin. You can register today. Thank you again for being here, and I look forward to seeing you at the next event. Have a great week ahead.
Thank you for having us.